It was on an evening of remarkable brilliance, both in illumination and in treachery, that the calamity occurred. The winter palace of Count Viktor von Rohn stood upon a gentle rise overlooking the Vltava, its baroque facade awash in golden light. Prague shimmered below like a scatter of diamonds cast upon velvet. Within the palace, crystal chandeliers trembled with candle fire, and the air carried the mingled perfumes of lilac arrangements and old aristocratic pride. But the occasion was one of cultivated grandeur. The unveiling of the Chalice of Saint Wenceslas, a relic newly rediscovered from the private vaults of the von Rohn family. A goblet of hammered gold set with garnets and a single dark emerald at its base. Legend whispered that it had been used in coronation rites and blessed by saints. Others whispered more darkly that it carried a curse upon those unworthy to drink from it. Such whispers, of course, were precisely what Count von Rohn intended, although the Count himself stood near the raised dais, a tall, silver-haired man whose aristocratic bearing was slightly marred by a habitual twitch at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were pale, almost colourless, and they surveyed his guests with a faint air of calculation. "My friends," he declared, raising a slender hand for silence, "tonight we restore not merely a treasure, but a legacy." Applause followed, polite, measured. Among the invited were diplomats, collectors, historians, and those who possessed sufficient fortune to covet objects of the past. But there were others present as well, individuals whose connections to the chalice were less publicly celebrated. Lady Milena Dvorak, a striking widow in midnight blue silk, stood near the tapestries. Her expression was composed, though her fingers twisted the stem of her champagne glass with restless energy. Dr. Thomas Varga, a historian specializing in medieval Bohemia, he adjusted his spectacles repeatedly as he spoke in hushed tones to a journalist. Anton Marek, the Count's personal secretary, thin, precise, and perpetually alert, hovered discreetly in the periphery. And Captain Svoboda, retired military officer and distant cousin to the Count, bore himself with rigid posture and a gaze too sharp for comfort. Finally, there was a guest whose presence, though modest, seemed somehow central to the symmetry of the evening. Our Hercule Poirot stood beside a marble column, immaculate as ever. His patent leather shoes gleamed, his moustaches curved upward in perfect mathematical elegance. He held a small glass of mineral water, nothing stronger. "Mon ami," said Captain Hastings at his side, lowering his voice, "you must admit it is a splendid affair." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Splendid, yes, but harmony, Hastings, true harmony, requires more than glitter, it requires balance, and I perceive—" He paused delicately. An imbalance." Hastings followed his gaze across the room but perceived nothing beyond ordinary aristocratic stiffness. "You detect something amiss?" Poirot tapped one gloved finger lightly against his temple. "I detect anticipation." The unveiling proceeded with theatrical precision. A velvet cloth was drawn away to reveal the chalice, which rested upon a pedestal beneath a glass dome. Its surface shimmered warmly in candlelight, the garnets catching flame like droplets of blood. A murmur rippled through the audience. Count von Rohn smiled thinly. "It is said," he continued, "that only a man of true honor may drink safely from this vessel." "Superstition," muttered Dr. Varga audibly. The Count's pale gaze flickered toward him. "History often disguises truth as superstition, Doctor." A faint tension, subtle but unmistakable, coiled through the chamber. Then came the moment none anticipated. "To commemorate this restoration," declared the Count, I shall drink first." A servant stepped forward bearing a decanter of Moravian wine. Under many watchful eyes, the Count himself removed the glass dome. He lifted the chalice carefully, almost reverently, and allowed the wine to flow into its ancient basin. He raised it. "To legacy," he said. The wine touched his lips. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the Count's hand trembled. The chalice slipped. It did not shatter. It was gold. After all, but it struck the marble floor with a resonant clang that echoed like a tolling bell. Count von Rohn staggered backward, one hand clawing at his throat. His pale face flushed crimson, then drained to ashen grey. A strangled sound escaped him, half gasp, half disbelief. And then he collapsed. Pandemonium erupted. Lady Dvorak screamed. Captain Svoboda lunged forward, kneeling beside the fallen Count. "Doctor, for God's sake!" Dr. Varga pushed through the crowd, fumbling with his coat. He knelt, fingers searching desperately for a pulse. The room seemed to contract, candlelight wavering as if in horror. After a long and dreadful moment, Dr. Varga looked up. "He's dead." Silence followed, heavy and absolute. The chalice lay on its side, a thin rivulet of dark wine creeping across the marble like a spreading stain of accusation. Inspector Jan Černý of the Prague police arrived within 20 minutes, brisk and unsmiling. The palace doors were sealed, no guest permitted to leave. It is clearly poisoning," the inspector announced. "The Count drank. He died. We shall determine who tampered with the wine." "Mais non," came a gentle voice behind him. Inspector Černý turned. Hercule Poirot stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Forgive me, Inspector, you reason too quickly." "The wine was poured before witnesses," the inspector replied curtly. "Just so," said Poirot softly. "Before witnesses?" Inspector Černý studied him with mild irritation. "Oh, and you are?" "Hercule Poirot." Recognition dawned slowly. "The Belgian detective?" "At your service." The inspector hesitated. Pride warred briefly with pragmatism. "You believe it was not the wine?" Poirot's eyes drifted toward the fallen chalice. "I believe, Inspector, that what we have witnessed is not a simple act of poisoning." He clasped his hands behind his back. "It is a performance." "A performance?" "Yes. Designed for an audience." Hastings blinked. "Surely, Poirot—" The Count would not stage his own death." Poirot gave a faint, regretful smile. "My friend, the Count has not staged anything. He is most sincerely dead." "Then what—" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Observe, Hastings, the chalice was handled only by the Count himself." The wine poured from a sealed decanter in full view. Yet death was instantaneous. He knelt delicately, examining the goblet without touching it. Poison introduced at the rim? Possibly. But why choose so theatrical a method unless one wished to send a message? Inspector Černý crossed his arms. "You imply symbolism." "Precisely." Poirot rose. "Who benefits from the Count's dramatic demise? Who stands to gain from the relic's sudden infamy? Who harboured resentment or fear?" Around the chamber stood the assembled guests, now no longer celebrants, but suspects. Lady Dvorak, pale and trembling. Dr. Varga, perspiring despite the winter chill. Captain Svoboda, jaw clenched in grim rigidity. Anton Marek, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Each face bore shock, but in one, just one, Poirot perceived something else, a flicker, not grief, not fear, but calculation. He said nothing. Instead, he adjusted his cuffs with impeccable calm. "Inspector," he said smoothly, "I request that no one leaves this palace tonight. The truth is here, among us. It is orderly, it is logical, it waits only to be arranged." Inspector Černý nodded slowly. "Or do you believe the murderer is in this room?" Poirot inclined his head. "I am certain of it." Outside, Prague's cathedral bells began to toll the hour. Within the palace, beneath chandeliers, now dimmed by dread, the ancient chalice lay silent, its dark emerald catching candlelight like an unblinking eye. And thus began the mystery of the poisoned chalice. Inspector Černy's men moved with brisk efficiency. Doors were checked, servants gathered, telephones removed from their cradles. A constable stood at the main entrance, and the palace, so lately a stage for admiration, became a sealed box. In the salon, the Count's body lay upon a chaise longue. Dr. Varga hovered near it, wiping his fingers with a damp handkerchief. The gilded chalice lay where it had fallen, now covered by an inverted glass bowl. "I should like," Poirot said softly, "that nothing be moved until we have observed all." "We will test the wine," Černý replied. "My chemist is on his way." "Excellent. But test also the rim," and Poirot's gaze lingered on the Count's slack hand, "the hands of the one who drank." Hastings stared. "His hands?" "Poison is sometimes offered," Poirot murmured, "to the mouth by way of the fingers." Černý signalled to a constable. "No one touches anything, understood?" Lady Milena Dvorak sat rigid in a carved chair, her gloved hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles showed pale. "This is impossible," she said. "Or Victor would never drink from it if he believed—" "If he believed what, madame?" Poirot asked, pleasantly. Her eyes flashed. "That someone would murder him in front of us all." Captain Svoboda gave a contemptuous sound. He believed everyone wanted him dead. He made enemies as easily as he breathed. Anton Marek, the secretary, stiffened. "Captain, you speak as if the Count—" "As if I knew him?" Svoboda cut in. "I did." Inspector Černý rapped the mantle. "Enough. Or you will be questioned one at a time. Marek, assist my men with the staff." Marek bowed too quickly and moved away. Poirot watched the hurried angle of his steps, the restless flexing of his fingers. Poirot approached the side table where the decanter stood, with 3 half-filled glasses. He did not touch them. "4 glasses besides the chalice," he remarked. "Guests were drinking," Černý said. "That proves nothing." "It proves," Poirot replied, "that there was wine meant for more than one mouth. Yet the Count chose the relic, because it is the symbol." Dr. Varga swallowed. "Inspector, I should return to the body. I must examine—" "You have examined enough," Černý snapped. "You will stay." Poirot turned to the doctor. "Did you smell anything peculiar on the Count's breath?" Varga blinked. "No, only wine." "No bitter almonds? No sharp medicinal odour?" "Nothing." "And the death was quick?" "A spasm," Varga admitted. "A tightening." "It's then—" Stillness. Černý gestured toward the adjoining library. Dark wood, leather books, a clock that ticked too loudly. "We begin," he said. "Monsieur Poirot, you may observe." Poirot bowed. "As you wish, Inspector." Captain Svoboda was called first. He entered like a man stepping onto a parade ground and remained standing. "You are family," Černý began. "You benefit from his death?" "A minor share," Svoboda said. "Not enough to murder for." "And your relationship with the Count?" "Correct." "Or formal. He enjoyed reminding me that my branch had less money." Poirot studied the captain's hands, clean, nails short, knuckles scarred. "Where were you?" he asked. "In the minutes before the toast." "In the salon, as you were." "You did not approach the pedestal?" "No." "You did not touch the chalice?" "No." "Did anyone?" Poirot's voice remained mild. Svoboda's mouth twisted. Half the room stared at it. Touch? Only Victor. Would he like to be the sole owner of things? Did the Count fear poisoning? Poirot asked. Svoboda's gaze sharpened. He feared exposure. Exposure of what? Černý demanded. Svoboda shrugged. Ask Marek. He keeps the keys and the secrets. He hates the Count, though he calls it loyalty. When Svoboda was dismissed, Dr. Varga was brought in. He sat too quickly, eyes flitting toward the door. You authenticated the chalice, Černý said. That brought you here. Yes, and the provenance is extraordinary. And you knew the Count would drink from it? Not until he announced it. Poirot leaned forward slightly. When the wine was poured, did you see anyone near the decanter before the servant approached? Varga hesitated. There were servants everywhere. Names, Černý snapped. A young footman, Petr, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Novakova. Poirot heard the hesitation first, then the names that followed like stones, tossed to muddy, clear water. Our Lady Dvorak entered last. She sat with effortless grace, hands folded perfectly, as if composure could be armour. Madame, Poirot said, you are fond of the Count? A faint smile touched her lips, cold as crystal. Fondness is for schoolgirls, Monsieur Poirot. Victor and I had an understanding. And his enemies? Poirot asked. He collected them as he collected relics. Then you will help us, Poirot said gently. She tilted her head. I will help you find the truth, but do not mistake this for grief. Poirot's moustaches quivered. Hastings felt with a chill that an invisible net was tightening thread by thread around everyone in the palace. Černý closed his notebook with a snap. We will speak next with this Peter and with the housekeeper. If poison was placed in the decanter, it required access. Poirot's eyes, however, drifted past the inspector to the corridor beyond, where servants waited in a tight line. One young footman stood apart, very white around the mouth, staring not at the body, but at the covered chalice. When he noticed Poirot watching, he looked quickly away, and his right hand disappeared into his pocket as though to hide a burn from prying eyes. Inspector Černý followed Poirot's gaze at once. You, he said sharply, pointing. Step forward. The young footman obeyed with visible reluctance. He could not have been more than 19. His livery hung slightly loose upon narrow shoulders, and a faint sheen of perspiration clung to his brow despite the coolness of the corridor. Your name? The inspector demanded. Peter Holub, sir. You were serving the wine. Yes, sir. Show me your hands. Peter hesitated only a fraction of a second, yet it was enough for Poirot to observe. Slowly, the young man withdrew his right hand from his pocket. A livid redness marked the pad of his thumb and forefinger. Inspector Černy's eyes narrowed. How did you burn yourself? Peter swallowed.
I did not burn myself, sir. Poirot stepped closer, his tone sympathetic. Come, my boy, the skin is irritated. It is recent. I caught it on the kitchen range earlier, Petr stammered. The range? Černý repeated. When? Before the guests arrived. The inspector's voice hardened. You will come to the library? Within minutes, Peter stood again beneath the heavy shadow of leather-bound volumes. The ticking clock seemed louder than before. You carried the decanter? Černý asked. Yes, sir. And you poured the wine into the chalice? No, sir. The Count poured it himself. I handed him the decanter only. Poirot's eyes glimmered. You touched the chalice at no time? No, sir. Yet you stared at it just now. Poirot observed mildly. Petre flushed. It is beautiful, monsieur. Indeed, beautiful things inspire strong feelings. Poirot inclined his head. Tell me, did anyone approach the pedestal before the Count removed the glass dome? Petre hesitated again.
Horse answer, Černý snapped. I saw Mr. Marek near it, Petre admitted. He said he was checking the placement. And did he touch the chalice? I think so, just to adjust it. Inspector Černý exchanged a quick glance with Poirot. Very well, the inspector said. You will remain available. As Petre withdrew, Poirot's gaze followed him thoughtfully. A clumsy lie, Hastings murmured. Perhaps, Poirot replied softly.
Yeah, but not necessarily a murderous one. You do not suspect him? I suspect, said Poirot, everyone. Anton Marek entered next, his composure restored, though the pulse at his throat beat rapidly. You adjusted the chalice before the toast, Černý stated. Yes, Inspector, it was slightly misaligned. Misaligned? Poirot echoed. Marek spread his hands. The Count insisted upon perfection. The emerald was not facing outward. Ah! Poirot nodded slowly. And you touched it? Lightly, through gloves. You were wearing gloves? Černý asked. Yes, as always during such handling. Where are they now? In my coat pocket. Produce them? Marek complied. The gloves were thin, kid leather, pale grey. Poirot accepted them delicately and turned them over without putting them on. No visible stain, he murmured. Inspector Černý leaned forward. Why would Peter claim you handled the chalice? Marek's eyes flickered.
Perhaps to shift attention from himself. You believe he is guilty? I believe, Marek said carefully, that servants can be bribed. By whom? Poirot asked. Marek hesitated. By anyone who wished harm to the Count. And many did? Poirot prompted. A shadow crossed Marek's face. The Count was not generous. Yet you remained in his service. I had reason? What reason? Černý demanded. Marek's lips pressed thin. Loyalty. Poirot studied him a long moment. When Marek left, Inspector Černý exhaled sharply. This grows tedious. The chalice was touched by Marek, the decanter by Petre, the wine by no one else. Except, Poirot said quietly, the Count. The inspector frowned. You believe he poisoned himself? I believe nothing yet, Poirot replied. But consider, death was almost instantaneous. That suggests a potent substance, swift, decisive. Cyanide, Černý said. Perhaps. Yet, doctor, Varga detected no odour. Not everyone smells almonds. True. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. Still something troubles me. What? The drama. Inspector Černy's brows drew together. Drama? Yes, the Count could have sipped privately. Instead, he proclaimed his intention. He lifted the chalice high. He drank before witnesses. He was theatrical. Indeed, but theatre requires intention. At that moment, a constable entered hurriedly.
Inspector, there is something you should see. They returned to the salon. The palace staff stood clustered near the doorway. On the marble floor near the pedestal lay a small object glinting faintly. Poirot bent gracefully. It was a ring. A heavy signet ring, set with a dark stone carved with a crest. Captain Svoboda stepped forward sharply. That is Viktor's. Was, corrected Černý grimly. It never left his hand, Svoboda insisted.
As he wore it always. Poirot glanced toward the chaise where the body lay. The Count's right hand was bare. When was this noticed? Černý demanded. Just now, sir, said a constable. It must have fallen during the collapse. Poirot crouched lower, examining the ring without touching it. No, he said softly. Černý stiffened. No? It was placed here. Placed? Yes, see how it rests, upright, balanced. A ring dropped in panic would not settle so. The inspector's face darkened. You suggest someone approached the body after death? I suggest, Poirot corrected gently, that someone wished us to see this. To see what? Hastings asked. Poirot's gaze lifted slowly to the assembled faces. The crest, he said. Captain Svoboda's jaw tightened. The von Rohn emblem. Yes, Poirot murmured. But note, the stone is cracked. A thin fracture ran across the carved surface. Svoboda inhaled sharply. That was not there earlier. Precisely, said Poirot. Inspector Černý looked from one to another. What does a cracked ring prove? Poirot rose. It proves, he said quietly, that the performance did not end with the Count's fall. Silence settled over the room once more. Lady Dvorak spoke at last, her voice low but steady. If this is theatre, Monsieur Poirot, then who writes the script? Poirot met her gaze. The one, he replied softly. Who understands symbols? His eyes drifted again to the chalice beneath its glass covering, the emerald at its base gleaming like an unblinking eye. And as the cathedral bells began once more to toll the passing hour, Poirot felt with certainty that the murderer had not merely sought to kill a man. He, or she, had sought to send a message. And the message had only just begun. Inspector Černý ordered the ring taken at once, but Poirot stopped him with a small gesture. Not yet, Inspector.
Hey, look first. Only look. The constable froze. Poirot pointed to the marble around the ring. A faint smear dulled the polish. A trace? Černý asked. Grease, perhaps. Or wax, Poirot murmured. Something to let a ring stand upright. Such little arrangements belong to a mind that loves control. Černý nodded. Photograph it, then bag it. While the constable worked, Poirot turned to the chaise where Dr. Varga hovered, eyes fixed on the Count's mouth. You look, Poirot observed, as though you hope he will speak. Varga swallowed. It is strange. The death was rapid, yes, but it seemed like choking. The jaw tightened, the throat seized, his eyes watered. No burns on the lips? Poirot asked. None? And no discoloration of the nails? None? Poirot's gaze drifted back to the covered chalice. Then perhaps the poison was not swallowed in the usual way. A contact poison on the rim where the lips touch, swift, silent. Inspector Černý straightened.
Oh, we will know when my chemist arrives? Yes, Poirot agreed, but meantime we use our little grey cells. He crossed to Mrs. Novakova, the housekeeper, who stood rigid among the servants like an officer among recruits. Madame, Poirot said with a bow, you are a woman of order. I must be, monsieur. Disorder ruins houses. Then you will tell us who had access to the chalice before the guests arrived. Only myself, Mr. Marek, the restorers from the museum, and the Count, she replied promptly. The restorers left before noon. And the rim, did they handle it? They wore gloves. They were instructed. Instructed by whom? By Mr. Marek, for the Count. Poirot nodded, filing it away. And the wine? The kitchen prepared it. Peter carried the decanter. From bottles in the cellar? Yes. Inspector Černý turned to the butler, Carroll, a thick-set man whose dignity looked permanently starched. Who fetched the bottle? I did.
Inspector? Alone? Carroll hesitated. then nodded. Alone? Very well, Cherney said. We will search the cellar. A shout rose from the corridor. A constable appeared, breathless. Inspector, something in the cloakroom. They hurried to the antechamber where coats and wraps hung in rows. On the floor, half hidden behind a pale fox stole, lay a slender glass vial with a cork stopper. It was empty, but a crystalline residue clung to the inside. Cherney's eyes hardened. Whose is it? Silence.
Hercule Poirot looked first at the stole. It was unmistakably Lady Dvorak's. Lady Milena's face went very still. That vial is not mine. The stole is, Cherney said. Yes, the vial is not. You expect me to believe someone planted it beneath your coat? The inspector demanded. I expect you to believe the murderer enjoys pointing, she replied evenly. First the ring, now this. Poirot murmured, almost to himself. A finger that directs the eyes. Hastings felt the room tilt, and as though the palace itself had shifted its weight. Someone had placed a prop, and the audience was meant to gasp at the right moment. Inspector Cherney signalled. Bring Lady Dvorak to the library. As she moved, Captain Svoboda caught Hastings's sleeve. You see, the widow. She quarrelled with him. Poirot's voice cut in softly. Captain, when everyone knows a thing, it is often because someone wishes it to be known. In the library, Lady Milena sat, chin lifted, and Cherney placed the vial on the table between them like a challenge. Explain, he said. I cannot. I did not carry it. Poirot leaned forward. Did you handle powders or medicines tonight? I carry smelling salts. In your bag? Yes. And may we see them? She opened her clutch. Inside lay a silver case. She snapped it open. A sharp, clean scent rose ammonia. Poirot nodded. Not our crystals? Cherney's pencil paused. Then who planted the vial? Lady Milena's gaze flicked to the door, out of the unseen company beyond it. The person who fears what Victor knew? Poirot's tone remained gentle. And what did he know, madame? For the first time her composure thinned. She drew a careful breath. He told me, she said, that if anything happened to him tonight, I must ask Mr. Marek about the second vault. Hastings saw Inspector Cherney's eyes narrow at the name. Marek, in that instant, became more than a fidgeting secretary. He became a hinge upon which the evening might turn. The second vault? Cherney repeated. Where? Lady Milena shook her head. He did not say, only that it existed and that Marek kept it secret. Poirot's voice stayed mild. Did the Count give you anything? A note? A key? No, she said. Then, after a pause, he pressed my hand when he greeted me. I thought it sentiment. Poirot held out his palm. Your glove, madame? She slipped it off. Inside the wrist a faint mark showed on the lining, dark, like wax, shaped as a short line. And a dot. A signal, Poirot murmured. The ring was set upright with wax. Wax leaves messages. Cherney leaned in. You mean he marked her? I mean, Poirot said, that before he died he tried to point us to what the murderer fears. Footsteps sounded. A constable opened the door. Inspector, Mr. Marek is not in the corridor. Poirot's eyes glittered. Then we find him, quickly. Because in a house of locked doors, a missing man is always a danger. And Inspector Cherney sprang from his chair so abruptly that the pen rolled off the table. For a moment the only sound was the tick of the library clock and the faint rustle of people in the corridor beyond. Seal the passages, Cherney barked. Stairs, servants' doors, the terrace. No one moves without my men. We are already sealed, Hastings protested. How can Marek vanish? Poirot's eyes remained calm. In every house there are places where a man may become thin as a shadow, while we must think like the one who keeps the keys. They hurried out. Servants clustered in frightened knots. Guests stood rigid in small groups, whispers dying as the inspector appeared. Captain Svoboda pushed forward. "The secretary has fled," he said. "That is your murderer." "Perhaps," Poirot returned softly, "or perhaps he is the next victim." Černý seized Mrs. Novakova's arm. "His rooms, where?" "Second floor, west wing," she said, "next to the Count's study." They climbed quickly, constables ahead with lamps. At the top, a dim corridor stretched between portraits of hard-eyed ancestors. Halfway down stood a closed door. "Mr. Marek's?" said the housekeeper. Černý tried the knob. Locked. Mrs. Novakova produced a ring of keys. The second turned with a click. The door opened a few inches and stopped, caught on something inside. "A chair," Hastings whispered. Černý shoved. The door gave. A chair lay on its side. The room beyond was in disorder, drawers half pulled out. Papers scattered, the bed cover dragged askew. No Marek. Poirot crossed the threshold without haste, his gaze moving from object to object. On the writing desk stood an open ledger. Beside it, an inkpot had been overturned, black stained the blotter. "This is no packing for flight," Hastings said. "No," Poirot agreed. "It is a search." Černý flung open the wardrobe. Clothing hung neatly. He yanked open a drawer. Folded socks, nothing more. "A hidden compartment," Poirot suggested gently. "Okay, the Count's man would know this house." A constable rapped the panelling. The sound changed slightly near the corner by the fireplace. "Here!" Poirot knelt. A faint seam ran along the wood, expertly disguised. He pressed a notch. The panel swung inward, revealing a cavity. Inside lay a leather pouch and a thin envelope sealed with red wax. Černý opened the pouch. Several small old keys gleamed. He held the envelope up to the light, frowning at the wax impression. The von Rohn crest cracked.
"Oh, the ring," Hastings murmured. Černý broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet in Marek's precise hand. "To whomever finds this, the second vault is not in the cellar. It is behind the saints. Do not trust the inspector. Do not trust the captain. If I am taken, follow the emerald." Černý's mouth tightened. "He accuses me." Poirot read it once, then again. "It is written to provoke. Do not trust. It scatters suspicion." "But behind the saints?" Hastings asked. Poirot turned his head slightly, or listening. From somewhere came a sound like a muffled knock, then scraping, then silence. Poirot raised a finger. "Hush!" Another dull thud followed nearer. "From the Count's study," Mrs. Novakova whispered, her face whitening. They ran the remaining length of the corridor. The door to the Count's study stood ajar. A lamp burned low on the desk. Beside the bookshelf, a tapestry depicting saints in gold thread hung slightly askew. Černý stepped in first. "Marek!" No answer.
Poirot's gaze fixed on the tapestry. The hem at the bottom had been lifted a few inches. "Behind the saints," Hastings breathed. Černý tore it aside. A narrow door concealed within the panelling stood open. Cold air flowed from the darkness beyond. Two constables lifted their lamps. A short passage led to stone steps descending. On the first step lay a man, Anton Marek. He was on his side, one arm crooked beneath him. His eyes were open, staring without seeing. A thin line of blood ran from his temple. Hastings felt his stomach turn. "Good God!" Poirot crouched. Marek's hand was clenched tightly, as though holding something. "Inspector," Poirot said quietly, "the murderer is still writing the script." Černy's voice was rough. "Is he dead?" Poirot watched the lips for any whisper of breath, then straightened. "Dead," he said. One constable swallowed. "He was here all this time?" "Yes," Poirot murmured. "And someone brought him here. After our questions began." Černy's face darkened. "Then the killer moved through my cordon." Poirot's gaze drifted to the stairwell's darkness and to the remembered gleam of the chalice's emerald. "Not through," he said softly. "Within." Poirot gently eased open the rigid fingers. A small object fell into his palm, a shard of dark green glass, triangular, sharp-edged, with a fleck of gold leaf clinging to it. Hastings stared. "From the emerald," he whispered. From something that wishes to resemble the emerald," Poirot corrected. He held it up to the lamplight. It glowed bottle green, not jewel deep. "A decoy, perhaps, or a signal." Černý snatched it, then, remembering himself, placed it carefully into an evidence envelope. "What does it mean?" "It means Marek tried to tell us where to look," Poirot said, "and that his killer was afraid he would succeed." He glanced down the steps. "There is more below. The second vault."
"Yeah, or the path to it." A faint draught rose again, carrying with it the stale scent of stone, and underneath, something sweeter, wine spilled long ago still. Inspector Černý ordered the stairwell lit and the body left where it lay. 2 constables stood guard above Marek. "We go down," Černý said. "If there is a vault, we find it now." Poirot shook his head gently. "First, Inspector, one question. How did the murderer bring Marek here without being seen?" Černy's jaw tightened. "A secret passage." "Just so. And who knows the secret passages?" Poirot's eyes rested on Mrs. Nováková, who crossed herself. "And who can command the servants without remark?" Černý ignored the implication and started down. Hastings followed, lamp in hand. The steps were narrow. At the bottom they reached a corridor that smelled of damp mortar and old metal. A line of dust lay undisturbed, except for one set of recent prints, small, quick,
and turning in upon themselves as if someone had paused to listen. The corridor ended at a heavy oak door banded with iron. Above it a niche held a wooden statue of a saint, its painted eyes flaking, its hands raised in blessing. "Behind the saints," Hastings murmured. Černý tried the door. Locked. He inserted one of the keys from Marek's pouch. The third key turned with a reluctant groan. The door swung inward. They entered a chamber no larger than a dining room, but lined from floor to ceiling with shelves. On them lay boxes, wrapped paintings, carved reliquaries, and ledgers tied with ribbon. It was less a treasure room than an archive of obsession. In the centre stood a pedestal, empty. Poirot moved to it at once. A ring of dust showed where something circular had rested, recently removed. "The chalice?" Hastings asked. Poirot's fingers hovered above the mark. "Something the size of a bowl, yes." Černý strode to the shelves. "Search. Anything that explains tonight." A constable lifted a lid. Inside lay bundles of letters sealed with wax impressions. Another shelf held a row of small vials, each labelled in cramped Latin. Hastings felt a cold prickle. Poisons, perhaps, curated like curiosities. Poirot examined the statue niche by the door. A faint scratch marked the wood beside the saint's foot, as though a ring had struck it. He looked down. There, half hidden in the dust, lay a sliver of green glass identical to the one taken from Marek's hand. 2 slivers, 2 signs, an arrow made of fragments. "Follow the emerald," Poirot whispered. not the stone, Hastings, the idea." Černý called sharply from the far wall. "Here, another door." Indeed, between two shelves, a narrow iron door stood disguised by hanging cloth. It bore a small, round plate inset at eye level. In its centre was a shallow depression the size of a gem. "A lock that requires a jewel," Hastings said. Poirot's gaze flicked to the pedestal's dust ring. "A jewel that has been removed from its rightful place." "The emerald at the base of the chalice," Černý said grimly. "Or its counterfeit," Poirot replied. "The shard is bottle glass. Someone has substituted a false emerald, easy to break." Černý's mouth tightened. "Then the real emerald is elsewhere." "And the murderer wishes us to chase these fragments," Poirot said softly. "While the true object travels in safer hands." A constable cleared his throat. "Sir, there's fresh wax on this plate." Poirot leaned in. The depression held a sheen like a film, and along the rim tiny grains glittered faintly. He smelled it delicately and drew back. "Rosa! To make the fit snug. Someone used a stone here not long ago." Černý struck the iron with his fist. "Open it!" "With what?" Poirot asked. "If we force it, we destroy what it hides." Černý glared, then turned on Mrs. Nováková. "Who else knew of this room?" She trembled. "Only the Count and Mr. Marek, Inspector, and—" Her eyes darted to the butler Karl. "And perhaps Captain Svoboda. He came here once, years ago, when the Count showed him the family papers." Svoboda, who had followed with stubborn curiosity, stiffened. "He bragged, that's all. I did not keep his keys." Poirot studied the captain's face. It was rigid, but a muscle worked in his cheek. "Captain," Poirot said, "you served in the army. You understand codes, symbols." Svoboda's eyes flashed. "Are you accusing me?" "I accuse no one," Poirot replied. "I arrange." Černý's constable returned from a shelf holding a folded paper. "Inspector, this was beneath a ledger." Černý snatched it. It was a program for tonight's unveiling, but someone had marked it in pencil, a small line and a dot, the same as on Lady Dvorak's glove. Beneath, 2 words, "Most Svatich." "The Bridge of Saints," Hastings translated, startled.
"I shall bridge." Poirot nodded. "Prague speaks in stones. The Count marked Madame's glove with a clue, and Marek wrote, 'Behind the saints.' Here is the refinement, the saints of the bridge." Černý's face darkened. "But the bridge is outside. We cannot let them all go." "We do not need to let them go," Poirot said calmly. "We need only see who reacts." He turned, lifting his voice so it carried up the stairwell. "Inspector, announce to the guests that the chalice has vanished from this vault, and that at dawn we will search the Charles Bridge for the emerald." The effect was immediate. Above, footsteps shuffled, a murmur rose, then one sharp cry, quickly smothered. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He had heard the cry. It was not Lady Dvorak's. It came from a man, and it carried fury, not fear. Inspector Černý stared at Poirot as though he had suggested setting the palace on fire. "You wish me to announce we have lost the very object we are sworn to secure?" "Exactly," Poirot replied.
"Aydin the murderer is a connoisseur of control. Tell him his control is imperfect, and he will betray himself, by anger, by haste, by a need to correct the scene." Černý nodded sharply and mounted the stairs. Poirot and Hastings followed, leaving 2 constables to guard the hidden chamber and Marek's body. Back in the main salon, the guests had been herded together. Faces shone pale in the chandelier light as Černý raised his hand. "Listen," the inspector said. "We have discovered a concealed vault. The chalice is not there. It has been removed. At first light we shall search the Charles Bridge, the Bridge of Saints, for the emerald and for the thief." A ripple ran through the crowd. Poirot watched each face as though they were cards being turned. Lady Milena's eyes widened, then steadied. Dr. Varga's mouth fell open, his hand rose to his collar. Carroll the butler looked down, expression closed. Peter the footman seemed about to faint. Captain Svoboda did not blanch. He stiffened. When a sound burst from his throat, raw, furious, before he could clamp his jaw shut. Poirot's gaze fixed on him. Svoboda recovered quickly, turning the outcry into a cough. "This is madness," he said harshly. "You chase fairy tales while the killer stands among us." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "And you do not like fairy tales, Captain?" Černý dismissed the group to the adjoining rooms under guard. Poirot approached Svoboda, who stood apart, fists clenched. "You have been to the Charles Bridge tonight?" Poirot asked. Svoboda's eyes snapped. "No." "You are certain? You did not step out for air. You did not send a man." Svoboda's nostrils flared. "You insult me." Poirot inclined his head. "It is my métier." Hastings noticed Svoboda's right cuff was damp, as though brushed against wet stone, and pale grit clung to the edge. A constable hurried in. "Inspector, the chemist has arrived." In the library, a thin man with a leather case unpacked bottles and papers. He bent over the covered chalice and the spilled wine, scraping at the rim, taking tiny samples. At last he straightened. "Inspector," he said, "there is poison on the rim, enough to kill. A contact poison, likely derived from aconite." "Aconite," Hastings repeated. "Wolfsbane?" The chemist nodded. "Rapid onset, spasms, tightening of the throat. It fits." Černy's eyes gleamed. Then whoever touched the rim applied it." "Or," Poirot said softly, "whoever ensured the Count would place his lips exactly there." Poirot pointed to the chalice beneath its glass. "The Count said the emerald was not facing outward until Mr. Marek adjusted it. Suppose the murderer desired the Count to drink from one prepared point. A tiny adjustment of orientation would decide everything." Černy's jaw tightened. "We must test Marek's gloves." "Oui," Poirot agreed.
And the hands of anyone who could have handled aconite without dying. Aconite can be absorbed through skin. The murderer would protect himself. Wax, resin, perhaps a barrier. Poirot's eyes moved to Mrs. Novakova. "Madame, you polish the silver?" "Yes, monsieur." "With wax?" "Sometimes." "And you prepare the candles?" "Yes." "The wax is in your charge," Poirot said gently. "A useful substance for one who wishes to touch poison without harm." Mrs. Novakova's face stiffened.
"I have served this house 30 years, Poirot bowed. "I accuse only the facts. Tell me, who set the candles on the dais? Who arranged the glass dome?" "Mr. Marek supervised," she said quickly, but Captain Svoboda insisted the pedestal be moved 2 inches so the guests could see better. Svoboda's head snapped around. "That is a lie." Poirot's tone remained mild. 2 inches may be enough to place a man under a draught, so that the hand trembles. Small adjustments create large results. Svoboda took a step forward, anger rising. "You are twisting trivialities into plots." "No," Poirot said softly. "I am untwisting a knot." A constable entered, holding a small parcel. "Inspector, this was found in the captain's coat pocket during the search." Svoboda went white. "You have no right." Černý opened the parcel. Inside lay a pair of thin rubber gloves, dusted with pale powder. The chemist leaned closer, sniffed carefully, then jerked back. "Oh, aconite residue," he said. Silence struck the room. Svoboda's eyes darted, not to Poirot, not to Černý, but to the window, as if measuring distance. Poirot stepped nearer, voice gentle. "Captain, you cried out in fury when I mentioned the bridge. You carry protective gloves. Tell us, why did you need them tonight?" Svoboda's chest rose and fell. For an instant he seemed about to speak. Then his hand flashed toward the nearest lamp, knocking it sideways. Glass shattered. Darkness bloomed, and in the confusion he lunged for the door. Hastings sprang after him, but Poirot was quicker than his neat appearance promised. He slipped into Svoboda's path, arms spread, and the captain struck him hard in the shoulder. Poirot staggered, yet his hand darted out and caught the captain's sleeve, tearing free a button and a smear of something oily that stung the nostrils. "Stop him!" Černý shouted. Boots thundered in the corridor. Svoboda barreled into the salon, scattering chairs. Turn made for the terrace doors. They were locked, he swore, and wheeled straight into two constables who had been posted there already. Inspector Černy's men pinned Captain Svoboda against the carved doorframe. He fought with the desperate strength of a man cornered, but the corridor was narrow and the constables were many. When they wrenched his arms behind him and snapped the cuffs shut, the palace seemed to exhale, a collective, shaky breath from guests and servants alike.
Take him to the library," Černý said, "and keep him watched." Svoboda's gaze swept the faces around him. It did not linger on Poirot with hatred, but with something colder, an appraising look, as though weighing how much Poirot already knew. Then his eyes slid away. Poirot touched his bruised shoulder. "A man who runs," he murmured to Hastings, "may run from guilt, or he may run from the noose that another has prepared." Hastings frowned.
But the gloves, aconite, his outcry." "Too neat?" Poirot said softly. "Crime is rarely neat, only the staging is neat." In the library, Svoboda was thrown into a chair. A lamp burned again. The chemist hovered near his case. Černý laid the rubber gloves on the table, as though they were a verdict. "You will explain," the inspector said. "Where did you obtain these? Why the powder? Why did you attempt escape?" Svoboda's jaw worked.
I attempted escape because I am being accused by a fool." Černý struck the table. "By evidence." Svoboda laughed once, harshly. "Evidence that appears in my coat pocket at a convenient moment." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You say it was placed there." "I say," Svoboda replied, "that someone wants me to hang for Victor's death." "Who?" Černý demanded. Svoboda's gaze flicked toward the door. "Ask the widow? Ask the doctor? Ask the secretary? Oh, pardon. You cannot." Hastings felt a chill at the steady malice in the captain's voice. Yet Poirot seemed almost soothed by it, as though the emotion itself were a clue. "You knew of the second vault," Poirot said gently. "He showed me once," Svoboda said. "To boast." "And tonight, someone needed a man with knowledge of hidden doors, a man whose anger is known, a man who would not faint at poison." Svoboda's eyes flared. "You are implying I was used?" "I am implying," Poirot corrected, "that you are useful to someone." Černy's patience frayed. "He is useful to the gallows. We have poison on the chalice and poison on his gloves." Poirot turned to the chemist. "Monsieur, the powder on the gloves, does it prove those gloves applied the poison?" The chemist hesitated. "It proves contact with aconite, not the act. The gloves could have touched the rim, or a vial, or a contaminated cloth." "A contaminated cloth," Poirot repeated softly.
Chumman thought of the oily smear he had torn from Svoboda's sleeve. Resin, wax, the tools of handling, not of killing. A constable entered abruptly. "Inspector, Lady Dvorak is unwell. She says she cannot breathe." Poirot rose at once. "We go." They hurried to the small drawing-room where Lady Milena had been placed under guard. She lay on a sofa, her face pale, her eyes wide and glittering. A half-finished glass of water stood on the side table. Poirot seized the glass, sniffed it, and set it down without drinking. "Do not touch your lips, madame," he said, voice low. "Do you feel tightening?" "Yes," she whispered. "It is like a hand." Poirot's gaze snapped to her bare hands. The glove with the wax mark lay nearby. He lifted it by the fingertips. On the inside cuff, a fine dust clung, pale, almost invisible. "Aconite," Poirot said quietly. Černy's face drained. "Someone tried to poison her now, inside my cordon." "Not now," Poirot corrected. "Earlier. The poison lay waiting on what she would touch when frightened. Her glove, her own glove." Hastings stared. "But who could have—" Poirot's eyes settled on the guard. "When did you give her the glove?" The constable stiffened. It was on the chair. "Was it?" Poirot asked softly. "Or was it brought after the announcement of the bridge, when panic rose and hands began to shake?" The man's face reddened. I found it in the cloakroom." "In the cloakroom?" Poirot murmured. Seeing again the vial beneath the fox stole, the props arranged like cards. "Inspector, the murderer is moving objects through obedient hands. He places a thing, another carries it, a third is blamed for touching it." Lady Milena's breathing rasped. Poirot took the smelling salts from her clutch and held them beneath her nose. She inhaled, coughing, and the spasm eased a fraction. "Keep her awake," Poirot instructed. "Send for a doctor, another doctor. Not Varga." Černy's eyes blazed. "Then Svoboda did not do this." Poirot shook his head. "Perhaps he did not kill the Count. Perhaps he did not kill Marek. But he may still have stolen, or he may still be violent. We do not release him. We simply do not stop thinking." He turned back toward the corridor, lowering his voice to Hastings. "The real emerald opens the iron door. The false emerald breaks into shards to guide us elsewhere. Someone wants the bridge at dawn because dawn gives crowds, noise."
"I'll escape." "And tonight?" Hastings whispered. "Tonight," Poirot said, eyes shining, "we find who can walk in darkness as if the palace belonged to him, who knows where every glove, every key, every saint, every shadow may be placed. If we wait for dawn, Hastings, we play his game. Before the bells ring again, I intend to steal back the initiative at once." Poirot drew Inspector Černý aside to the recess of the corridor and lowered his voice to the intimate firmness Hastings knew so well.
"Inspector, you have a palace full of suspects, but only a few have the power to move objects without question. A glove appears, a vial slips beneath a stole, a door is found ajar. Always it is a servant's hand that completes the act. The murderer must command those hands, or be one of them." Černy's expression was grim. "You look at the housekeeper." "I look at the house," Poirot replied. "Who knows every hiding place? Who knows which saint conceals which latch? Or who can send a footman here and a butler there?" Černý nodded once. "Karel, Mrs. Novakova." "And Dr. Varga," Poirot added softly. "He is permitted near bodies and bottles." They returned to the library where Svoboda sat guarded, his eyes fixed on the table. Poirot did not address him. Instead he turned to Černý. "Give me 10 minutes, Inspector, quietly." Poirot had Mrs. Novakova, Karel the butler, and Dr. Varga brought in, each with a constable at an elbow, and the chemist lingered in the corner with his case open. Poirot produced the torn button from Svoboda's sleeve. "This is nothing," he said gently, "yet it tells me a small story." The captain brushed against resin, sticky, fresh. "Where is resin used tonight?" Mrs. Novakova replied at once. "For wax seals, monsieur, in the pantry, for candles also." "Exactly," Poirot murmured. "Many uses." He took a clean handkerchief from his pocket and held it out to Dr. Varga. "Doctor."
Wipe your fingertips." Varga blinked. "Why?" "Because I ask." Reluctantly, Varga rubbed his fingers on the cloth. Poirot passed it to the chemist, who dabbed a reagent. A faint discoloration bloomed. Černý leaned forward. "What is that?" "A trace of aconite," said the chemist. "Small, but real." Varga's face drained. "Impossible. I touched only the Count's throat." "And the poisoned rim," Poirot said, "may have touched you while you examined him. So this proves contact. It's not guilt." Poirot turned to Carrel. "And you, monsieur le majordome, where were you when the ring was discovered?" Carrel's eyes flickered. "In the corridor." "And who would notice if you stepped into the salon for a moment?" "No one," Carrel admitted stiffly. "But I did not." Poirot nodded as though satisfied, then asked abruptly, "Who suggested the Count drink from the chalice?" Silence. Mrs. Novakova said carefully, "The Count himself." "But the preparations?" Poirot pressed.
"Yeah, who handled the display after the restorers left? Who brought it from the hidden vault to the salon?" Carrel answered, "2 footmen carried it beneath the dome." "Which 2? Petter and Jiri." Jiri was summoned, older, heavy-shouldered, with a stubborn chin. He looked at Svoboda and allowed himself a thin smile. "You polished the dome," Poirot said. Jiri frowned. "The housekeeper told me to, with the cloth." "What cloth?" "The pantry cloth. Had the one used near the sealing wax." Poirot's moustaches trembled. "Ah!" He turned to Mrs. Novakova. "Madame, if a cloth used for wax and resin were dusted with aconite, then polishing transfers poison. When the dome is lifted, the poison reaches the rim, not by Jiri's intention, by yours." Mrs. Novakova's mouth opened, then closed. "Monsieur, you are dreaming." Poirot's voice stayed gentle, but his eyes were hard. "Then explain why Marek died in the Passage of Saints. Explain Lady Dvorak's glove returning from the cloakroom already poisoned. Who told the guard where to find it? You did. You command this house." Černy's hand went to his pistol. "Mrs. Novakova." She raised her palms. For a heartbeat she seemed merely an old servant appalled by accusation. Then her expression flattened, almost bored. "You are clever, Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly. "Too clever for a little foreigner with a moustache." Hastings felt a jolt. The voice was not trembling now, and it was cold steel. "And you," Poirot said softly, "are too tidy. You arrange the evening as you arrange the linen." The Count kept a second vault. He threatened to open it, to expose what he had hidden behind the saints. You could not allow it. Mrs. Novakova's eyes flicked toward Carrel. "Do it," she said. Carrel moved, fast, brutal, swinging a heavy brass paperweight toward Poirot's head. Poirot swayed aside at the last instant. The paperweight grazed his shoulder and smashed into the bookcase, sending leather spines thudding to the floor. Before Carrel could strike again, Hastings flung himself forward and caught the butler's wrist. The man was stronger than he looked. Hastings felt tendons like wire. They staggered, knocking over a chair. "Hold him!" Černý roared. 2 constables seized Carrel, wrenching the weapon free. Carrel did not struggle much, only enough to keep his eyes on Poirot, waiting for a cue. Poirot looked not at Carol, but at Mrs. Novakova. You had an accomplice, Poirot said. But you chose a dangerous one. Mrs. Novakova gave a small shrug. Men are tools. And the chalice? Poirot asked. Where is the real emerald? Her gaze slid to Svoboda. The captain's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. Poirot nodded as though a piece had clicked into place. The bridge at dawn, yes, but not for you, madame. For him. Captain Svoboda will carry it there, believing he serves vengeance. You provided the poison. You provided the passages.
You provided the scapegoat. Svoboda's head jerked up. Lies! He shouted, too loud, too quick. Svoboda's shout hung in the library like a cracked bell. For an instant, no one moved. Poirot did not raise his voice. He merely turned his head, and the calmness of that motion drew every eye. Captain, he said, you protest too much and too late. You have been angry all evening, but not surprised. When the vial appeared beneath Lady Dvorak's stole, you did not ask whose it was. When Marek vanished, you did not ask how. You leapt at every cue like an actor who knows his marks. Svoboda's face darkened. You spin words. I arrange facts, Poirot corrected. Let us arrange them now for all. Inspector, bring the guests. Černý sent his men. Within minutes, the salon's company was packed into the library. Lady Milena supported by a maid, Dr. Varga sweating, Peter white as linen, Jiri scowling. Carol stood cuffed, head lowered. Mrs. Novakova waited with her hands folded.
Or an image of obedience that no longer deceived. Poirot stepped to the table where the chalice shard lay in its envelope and where the rubber gloves sat like a dead thing. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, tonight you were invited to admire a relic. In truth, you were invited to witness a message? He held up the programme marked with the line and dot. The Count, in fear, tried to leave a trail. He pressed a clue to Lady Dvorak's glove, wax, a simple code. Marek wrote, "S behind the saints." Another hand refined it, the Bridge of Saints. All of this was meant to make you look outward, away from the house, away from the servants' corridors. Lady Milena's eyes flashed. Victor trusted no one. Why would he trust his housekeeper? He did not, Poirot said gently. He feared her. That is why he warned you of Marek and the second vault. Poirot turned toward Mrs. Novakova. You kept this palace as you keep your pantry, every jar labelled, every cloth folded, every person in their place. The Count's greed offended you. Worse, he threatened to open the second vault, to sell what should have remained hidden. Mrs. Novakova's expression did not change. You speak of devotion. I speak of possession, Poirot replied. You loved the house more than the man, so you killed the man to save the house. A low murmur swept the room. Dr. Varga shook his head. Madness. Poirot continued, each sentence a link. Aconite is dangerous to handle.
One must protect one's skin, so you used wax and resin, barriers, grips, a film. You dusted a polishing cloth with poison, then ordered Jiri to polish the dome. When the dome was lifted, the rim was contaminated. The Count, insisting the emerald face outward, ensured the prepared point met his lips. Death came quickly, dramatic, perfect. Černy's voice cut in. And Marek? Marek knew the passages and the vault, Poirot said. He found evidence, perhaps the substitution of the emerald.
Perhaps ledgers. You could not let him speak. You lured him to the Saint's Passage, or you sent Carol to drag him there, a blow, staged note, a shard of false emerald in his hand, another prop. Peter made a small, broken sound, staring at the housekeeper as though seeing her anew. Poirot's gaze shifted to Captain Svoboda. "And you, Captain? You did not apply the poison. You did not strike Marek. But you were recruited by your anger, your pride, your hunger for the family name, and the housekeeper fed you the story that the chalice and its emerald were yours by blood. She hid the real emerald and promised you the glory of retrieving it at dawn from the bridge." Svoboda surged against his cuffs. I wanted justice." "Justice?" Poirot's voice sharpened. "You ran when the gloves were found. An innocent man argues, a guilty man flees. You fled because you carried the theft, if not the murder. The grit on your cuff was from the vault stairs. The resin on your sleeve was from the ceiling wax. You were in the passages." Svoboda's eyes burned. He turned toward Mrs. Novakova. "You said he deserved it," he whispered. Mrs. Novakova sighed. "He did." Poirot looked to Inspector Černý. "The chalice itself, where is it now?" "Not on the bridge. Still here, hidden where only a keeper of linens would think to hide treasure. Inspector, search the laundry room's drying cabinets. The heat preserves wax, the cloth conceals gold." Černý snapped orders. A constable hurried out. Poirot stepped closer to Lady Milena. "Madame, you were nearly killed not because you knew too much, but because you were useful as a corpse. One more dramatic death would seal the story against the true murderer." Lady Milena's lips trembled. "And what of me now?" Poirot bowed. "Now you live." Footsteps pounded in the corridor. The constable returned, breathless, carrying a bundle of sheets. From within gleamed bright gold and the green of an emerald. Inspector Černý took the chalice with gloved hands. "Mrs. Novakova," he said, "you are under arrest for the murder of Count von Rohn and of Anton Marek, and for attempted murder." Karl's shoulders sagged. Svoboda stared at the emerald as though it had betrayed him. Mrs. Novakova merely closed her eyes. Poirot straightened his cuffs. "The little grey cells," he murmured to Hastings. "They dislike theatrics. They prefer the simple truth. The murderer is not the one who shouts loudest,
but the one who tidies the room after the scream." Dawn came pale and restrained over Prague, as though the city itself were reluctant to intrude upon the reckoning within the Winter Palace. A thin wash of silver lay across the Vltava, and the statues upon the Charles Bridge stood in solemn silhouette, innocent of the drama for which they had nearly served as unwitting accomplices. Inside the palace library, the final formalities were being completed. Mrs.
Novakova sat upright, despite the constable at her side. Her composure had returned, not the brittle serenity of defiance, but the stillness of a woman who had long ago chosen her allegiance and would not recant it. Karl, less resolute, stared at the carpet. Captain Svoboda stood apart, wrists still bound, fury now replaced by something quieter and more corrosive, humiliation. Inspector Černý closed his notebook with deliberate care. "It is finished," he said. Poirot, who stood near the window adjusting his cuffs with meticulous attention, inclined his head slightly. "Not entirely, Inspector. Justice is a process. Understanding is the conclusion." Hastings, weary yet alert, watched as the remaining guests, Lady Milena, Dr. Varga, the servants, gathered once more. There was no theatrical arrangement this time, no dramatic unveiling, only the quiet gravity of truth laid bare. Poirot stepped forward. "You have all witnessed the unmasking of the principal culprit," he began gently. "But let us examine one final point. Why?" His gaze rested on Mrs. Novakova. "You loved this house," he said. "More than its master. You preserved its order through wars, through debts, through scandal. The Count, however, saw in it only currency. He intended to sell pieces of its history, perhaps even the chalice itself. Mrs. Novakova's lips tightened. She did not deny it. He discovered, Poirot continued, i.e. that the second vault contained records, letters, proof of certain transactions that would disgrace the family name. He meant to bargain with them. You believed that by removing him, you preserved not only the house, but its honor. Honor, Svoboda spat bitterly. Yes, Poirot said calmly, turning to him. Honor is a dangerous word. You believed yourself its champion. When Mrs. Novakova whispered that the emerald rightfully belonged to your branch of the family, you listened.
Your resentment made you pliable. Svoboda's shoulders sagged. She did not need you to poison the chalice, Poirot went on. She needed only your knowledge of the passages and your temper to serve as distraction. The gloves in your coat ensured that when suspicion turned, it would turn convincingly. Inspector Černý nodded grimly. And Marek? Marek discovered the substitution of the emerald, Poirot replied. The real gem had been removed earlier and hidden.
As the false emerald, glass, was meant to be shattered as a signpost guiding us toward the bridge and away from the laundry room. Hastings could not help but admire the precision of it, the layering of misdirection, each clue placed like a chess piece. Marek confronted Mrs. Novakova, Poirot said softly. She lured him to the hidden stair. Karl struck him. The note in his hand, written earlier, was repurposed as part of the illusion. Dr. Varga shifted uneasily. And the attempt on Lady Dvorak? A final tightening of the knot, Poirot answered. If suspicion wavered, another dramatic poisoning would confirm the narrative of a curse or a broader conspiracy. But the dosage was imperfect. Panic rushed the hand that prepared it. Mrs. Novakova's composure flickered at last. "You think me careless?" she asked quietly. "No," Poirot replied. "I think you human, even the most orderly mind phrase under strain." Silence followed. Outside, Aude bell tolled the early hour. Inspector Černý signalled his men. Mrs. Novakova and Karl were led away. Svoboda followed under guard, no longer defiant. When they had gone, the library seemed larger somehow, emptier, as though the air itself had shifted. Lady Milena approached Poirot. "You have restored more than justice," she said. "You have restored clarity." Poirot bowed slightly. "Clarity, madame, is merely the removal of shadows." She studied him a moment. "And what of the house?" "That," Poirot replied, "depends upon those who love it wisely." She inclined her head and withdrew. Inspector Černý approached last. "I misjudged the direction," he admitted. "You saw beyond the obvious." Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "The obvious is a costume, Inspector. One must ask who tailored it." Černý extended his hand. Poirot shook it with polite firmness. When the inspector departed to complete the necessary arrangements, Hastings joined his friend by the window. The light had strengthened. Prague stirred awake. "It was nearly perfect," Hastings said. "The staging, the symbolism." "Nearly," Poirot agreed. "But murderers who adore symbolism often betray themselves. They fall in love with their own design." He glanced toward the recovered chalice, now secured within an evidence case. The emerald at its base gleamed with quiet dignity. "No curse, then," Hastings said lightly. Poirot's smile curved beneath his moustache. "My dear Hastings, the only curse is human vanity." They descended the palace steps together. The chill of morning air carried the scent of river mist and distant bread ovens. Behind them, the winter palace stood serene once more, its facade giving no hint of the turmoil within. As they crossed the courtyard, Hastings looked back. "Do you ever tire of these dramas?" he asked. Poirot paused. "On the contrary," he said thoughtfully, "they remind me that beneath grandeur and relics, beneath gold and emeralds, the true mystery is always the same. And that is," he tapped his temple lightly, "the human heart. It is the most elaborate vault of all." With that, Hercule Poirot adjusted his hat, cast one final measured glance at the Palace of Saints and Secrets, and stepped into the waking streets of Prague, leaving behind a house restored to order,
and a lesson carved more deeply than any emerald into the memory of those who had witnessed the poisoned chalice.